knew I wanted to do something with farming, and I grew up on the farm, but I couldn't farm 500 acres of corn or soybeans or that kind of stuff because that's too expensive to get into now. So I thought about raising strawberries and blackberries and raspberries, and I thought I'm going to have to need pollinators if I'm going to plant them, and I didn't know anything about bees. So I started doing research, and that's when I started researching about bees. That was 2013, the winter of 2013. The bees themselves do not hibernate. They stay alive all winter long. And the way they generate heat, they eat the honey. And the colder it is outside, the closer together and more packed they are inside the hive, and they generate heat. And in the center of that core, that cluster, it's going to be about 95 degrees, even in the winter. That's the optimum temperature between 93 to 98 degrees. In that neighborhood is optimum temperature for raising brood. So what happens is that cluster of bees are going to stay clustered. The queen will stop laying eggs somewhere around late November. And she won't lay any more eggs, so they don't need to raise brood because they're going to be starving for food. So everything's about conservation for the hive. But when the days start getting longer in February, maybe late January, the queen will start laying eggs. Now she may only lay 200 or 300 a day. During the peak season, she's going to lay 1,500 to 2,000, maybe as many as 3,000 eggs a day. A queen can live up to 3 to 5 years. A worker bee during the busy season, when they do a lot of flying, could only live roughly 6 to 8 weeks, but they can live up to a year. So the worker bees that are hatched in the fall, late October, November, those ones have got to live all winter long and raise the brood until the queen starts laying new eggs and new brood comes out. The hard candy is basically emergency food. If they run out of honey, at least they've got sugar there that they can eat and consume to stay alive until it gets warm enough if you have to feed them liquid sugar. Sometime in late September or somewhere in the middle of September, if they don't have enough honey to make it through the winter, you're going to have to feed them to make it through the winter. It takes a lot of honey to raise brood. And nature has it that we're starting to you start to see flowers blooming, you're starting to see trees blooming, you're starting to see all kinds of things blooming. Nature has it so that the queen's probably laying 1,000, 1,500 eggs right now a day. And if it gets really cold for a week and the bees can't go out and bring stuff in, well, the brood's going to start hatching and they're going to start getting bigger and bigger inside the hive. They got to eat something. And if they run out of stores, they can actually starve to death this time of year if it stays too cold, too wet, or whatever. So that's why you got to have sugar water on place as emergency food for the bees. I enjoy beekeeping. I never thought I'd enjoy beekeeping as much as I do. And I wish I had. If there's any regret I wish I'd have gotten into beekeeping when I was your age. I prayed about it. You just asked, what did I do? I kind of felt like God's my teacher too. I would probably say you have to do a lot of research and get with a beekeeper. I had the advantage of having a mentor, who was a beekeeper for over 50 years. And I was able to dwell off of his knowledge and call him in many times, get a good mentor, and be part of a bee club, and do a lot of research, and just be willing to absorb like a sponge. And not be so in a box, think outside the box. And do what's best for the bees.